Hello, challenge participants. My name's Laura Rafferty, account-based marketing manager for NatWest in Fujitsu, and I'm delighted to bring you a session today on entrepreneurship, which is something you told us you would like to hear more about. So NatWest has a long history in supporting entrepreneurs and startups. Recently, the Entrepreneur Relief Fund granted $5 million to young entrepreneurs in partnership with the Princess Trust to weather the downturn due to COVID-19. The NatWest Business Hub is an invaluable resource for new businesses with information and live events, but a quick search brings up nothing for B2B or business to business. I'm delighted to hand over now to Gary Fegan, who's going to interview Fujitsu's dedicated client executive to the NatWest account about some of the differences in B2B entrepreneurship, in particular when selling to financial services companies, how Fujitsu is helping their plans to make it even simpler in the future.
Hi there. My name's Gary. I'm one of the innovation consultants who works with Fujitsu to deliver new products and services to NatWest, and I'm delighted to be speaking to my client executive, Kevin Spence. Hello, Kevin.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for inviting me.
So, as we enter into a second lockdown across the UK, a number of people are likely thinking about starting their own careers, especially if they've been on furlough for a long time, where they may unfortunately be made redundant. But most people think of entrepreneurs building products for customers, so what they call business to customer or B2C. But what about business to business or B2B as it's known? What's the differences between, say, a business to business product and a business to consumer product, Kevin?
So it's a good question, and it's a really relevant one. I mean, the market around B2B as opposed to B2C is about 3 times the size. So it's a significant footprint in terms of, if we think about entrepreneurs and NatWest, your customers, it's a significant proportion. But this is where clients or your customers, those entrepreneurs, are selling to a larger institution, say like a Fujitsu, or to say a NatWest or another large corporate, rather than selling directly to that consumer. And the characteristics of what that takes is fundamentally different. But also the size of the prize is greater. B2C, you could be selling a pair of trainers or some clever piece of technology directly to a consumer. With business to business, you're talking about larger, probably larger engagements with a larger benefit to that client. Also to that customer. But there's also the potential for collaborations that extend beyond just that immediate business. It could be opportunities for joint ventures. They could be looking at acquisition targets. I mean, there's a rich plethora of opportunities that come through business to business as opposed to BTC. And the characteristics of the business are fundamentally different. Over half of Fujitsu's supply chain organizations we work with are in that B2B space as opposed to those that sell direct, just to give you an example. And of course, we are a B2B business ourselves, so we have to work and we sell to large enterprises. We're not selling to consumers.
Okay, so now that makes a lot of sense. So, there's obviously a big difference from me selling an iPad to a consumer to me selling a bit of software or service to a large company like NatWest. So can you educate us a little on what the major differences that a B2B company need to think about in terms of that sales cycle and then the whole procurement exercise?
Well, I think the key thing to call out is the difference. Obviously, if you're selling to the consumer, the transaction is relatively straightforward. I've got something, they want that something, they buy that something, job done. It's fairly simple, very singular sort of procurement orientated in terms of who you've got your proposition and you got your customer. Simple. Selling to large organizations like a bank or even to Fujitsu is very complex. You're part of a solution, you're not the solution, you're providing something that they want to consume, to assimilate into their organization and then sell it on to your target customer, their target customer. And there are lots of components around how that gets consumed into a large organization, lots of different factions, departments that all have a very different view. So procurement at one hand, maybe your technology teams on another, you've got your risk compliance people, there are standards to observe around supply, your corporate policies around CSR objectives, a whole raft of things that suddenly come into that buying cycle and selling cycle that you wouldn't typically experience at all if you're in that sort of B2C space. So a lot more complex. And for small enterprises, entrepreneurs starting up, that can be quite bewildering and to a large extent very difficult to predict in advance, because a lot of this stuff comes from experience. If you've been around the block a few times, you've worked with large enterprises, you build up that experience and that awareness, you know kind of what's coming. My own experience talking to entrepreneurs that we've worked with, even those that have been round the block a few times, still get caught out by the sheer complexity of dealing in that business to business context, working with large enterprises. So it's very opaque. It's not very obvious. There's things the industry are trying to do, particularly around technology, to make it a bit more transparent. Maybe come back to that later. But it can be very opaque and quite daunting for those entrepreneurs. And certainly if they're starting up, a lot of them have got no idea what's coming. And so their expectations could be, the first person I met, they're going to like it, they're going to buy it, and I'm going to make my fortune. That never happens. Or very rarely happens, I should say. So yeah, the reality is this is a slow process and complex. And to a large extent, a lot of mistakes will be made unless they're kind of getting some help to educate and plan for that.
So it all sounds incredibly difficult and maybe not even worth starting off on this journey. But how can someone like Fujitsu maybe help make this process a little simpler for these startups, especially ones that maybe have not been around for very long and therefore, might be too high risk for the likes of a bank to even do business with?
Well, as I say, Fujitsu's business is very much business to business, and half our supply chain is made up of smaller companies. Some of them are startups, some of them have got really innovative technology, and we help them bring to market. So to a large extent, in the way that we go to market, is we do have that experience. We've had people that are in specialist practice around procurement, people who understand compliance and risk. They understand the regulatory domains, of whether it's in utilities or it's in financial services or whatever. So we'll have a rich body of resource to draw in that understands how do we navigate the path for that particular piece of technology, or whatever that the product is that company is innovating in. So to a large extent, that's experience. We bring and have a lot of that experience in working with a lot of customers in a lot of different sectors. So it's easy when we think about it in terms of, well, they're a supplier to Fujitsu, we've selected them, we know what we'd like to work with that supplier on, and we can see how we can bring them into our relationship with a large enterprise and help that transaction happen. And of course, that's really productive. I say 50% of our own supply base is that sort of business. The kind of initiatives we've been looking at, though, is how does that experience that we have as an enterprise with maybe other organizations, how do we provide that in a way that would provide more coaching to organizations that aren't necessarily being supplied or being procured through Fujitsu? And that's been a really interesting discussion that I've been personally involved in for probably the last 18 months, looking at the financial services sector and a particular cluster of entrepreneurs and startup businesses around fintech. As a technology company, as Fujitsu, we see a huge opportunity for fintech disruption and in industries like NatWest's. Some of those will be organizations that are going direct, like a Monzo starting up and being an innovative disruptor in financial services. A lot of them are providing capabilities within financial services, but in a very, very different way. A lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, but also an awful lot of naivety there. But actually, in the classic sort of idea of rising tides, if the industry and the technology innovation that's available, if we can find that being adopted faster and better by some of the larger institutions and enterprises out there, then technology companies like benefit from that, whether we're directly involved or not, because the industry is moving forward. So we've seen an opportunity. We've seen a lot of paralysis in the industry, particularly around fintech, because the ability for large enterprises, whether it's an investment bank, whether it's a retail bank like NatWest, or an insurer or whatever, if there's a lag there around that from B2B perspective of those institutions adopting some of these innovative technologies because it's too hard, can we do something about our experience as Fujitsu to help educate these fintechs ahead of time and prepare the way for what they're getting into. And also, can we do something more collaborative at an industry level to get the industry better tuned into how fintechs, particularly smaller startup businesses, are configured that makes it easier for them, makes the path more predictable, and makes your ability as an institution, say as NatWest, to consume these fintechs. So we've been looking for the last 18 months with Fintech Scotland. That's the industry body that is looking after fintechs in Scotland, that whole community, trying to create that whole advancement in the community in Scotland, and how we could work collaboratively with Fintech Scotland and a number of institutions in Scotland to do exactly that. Yeah, what are the kind of prerequisites to doing business with a large institution? How do you educate the fintechs ahead of time of what they need to be capable of? How do we help them understand where their gaps are in their capability today, that they can then strategize now rather than trip over it later around plugging those gaps? So either they resource it themselves, they find new partnerships, or ideally, how do we temper the expectations of some of the institutions so they meet them halfway rather than imposing them fairly draconian and maybe outdated sort of procurement standards or compliance standards that these organizations have not got a cat and hell's chance of making. So we've been working quite actively on that, as I say, for about 18 months. We've got an initiative called Solitario. It's a collaboration across the industry with a number of organizations and institutions in Scotland to look at resetting and defining ahead of time a common set of standards around what fintechs should be capable of, and providing a mentoring and coaching process to support these fintechs as whatever life stage they're in, around what's coming and what they need to be capable of, but get the community to work collaboratively on that common set of standards. So what's good for a NatWest should be good enough for a Lloyds. Yeah, a common NDA to allow you to work with one bank should be the same terms and conditions that could work with another. And that's based on our experience, but now the collective experience of lots of institutions in Scotland. Although as we started in Scotland, it's not unique to that. It's just that's a great community that we can work with. So that's probably one example, and quite a big example, Gary.
So Kevin, the Solitario initiative sounds really, really interesting. And just to finish up, for those people who are actually participating in this early careers challenge, what takeaways and lessons can they have when they're actually working within the bank and having to deal with these SMEs that are trying to sell to the likes of NatWest?
So I think it's really important to, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, entrepreneurs and supporting entrepreneurs and enterprise is a key pillar of NatWest's purpose statement, and it's one that we completely get. And Fujitsu wouldn't be successful if we weren't working with such businesses. It's 3 times the size of business potential in the business-to-business market compared to the business to consumer. So yeah, your focus is thinking about supporting your customers, those entrepreneurs. Keep that in mind. It's more complicated, but actually there are things that you could be doing as an organization to make it easier. Yeah, recognizing that actually what's good to what you might put in place to work with a large organization, say like a Fujitsu, needs to be tempered quite significantly if you're working with a smaller enterprise. They don't have all of that in place. Yet innovation and entrepreneurship is the very foundation, what drives our business, drives our economy. So we want to make it easier for them. So what is it you could do differently in your organization to make how you work with these sort of businesses, configure it to being appropriate at the scale that they're involving, and make it easy, bring them in, grow with them, rather than introduce maybe some draconian and one size fits all kind of institutions up front. Think about it in terms of supporting them as an enterprise. Yeah, they don't know what's coming. They will have a lot of gaps in their capability. How could you coach them and support them more broadly on what it takes to be successful within your own organization? Because I think that's about preparing the way for what's coming. And so if you can meet them halfway by simplifying, that's a great, but actually just help them understand what's coming. The bank already invests a lot in their business accelerator hubs. And we've been talking, for example, to Gordon Merrilees, who runs that program. And some of these the bank's really good at supporting with these soft skills, kind of the business planning skills, business banking, and all the aspects of supporting the entrepreneur. But actually, the experience-based elements of kind of how to negotiate terms and conditions around compliance, how to work with procurement departments. These are skills that actually are not easily acquired by a small startup business, but you as an organization have those in abundance. So actually you could do an awful lot by just sharing some of that, more of that expertise in your own organization with those startup businesses. That will definitely support and nurture their potential and ultimately support organizations like NatWest succeed.
Thanks, Kevin, and hopefully you might see an article on B2B sales within the NatWest Business Hub sometime soon. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you, Kevin and Gary. That was great, and I hope you all found that valuable, especially the key takeaways at the end there. I think that was really important. If you have any questions for us as an organisation, or for Gary or Kevin in particular, you can drop them in the workplace chat below, and we will get back to you. And I'll also provide some contact details so that you can get in touch directly. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.